For any theater lover, visiting the West End or Broadway is a dream come true. And the best part about this is that there are a lot of productions that you can see in both of these cities. If you want to see Wicked, you can see it in both New York and London, or Hamilton, or Moulin Rouge. But something that is really confusing is the price of the tickets and the difference in these prices. Because the West End is known to be cheaper than Broadway. And in this video, I'm trying to uncover how much more Broadway is really expensive compared to the West End for the same 10 shows and productions that you can see in both places. Hopefully this will provide a little bit of clarity and kind of manage expectations if you're visiting, for example, Broadway and trying to budget for a theater. So for this analysis to work, I needed to pick one day, and that is the 25th of April 2024. It's a Thursday, which means the tickets could be more expensive if you're looking to see these shows on the weekend. The second rule was to use only official production websites, not the third-party providers, so we can really have a fair comparison. If you are visiting any of these places, then make sure to also check on third-party providers, because sometimes there are deals on the day, or maybe there's a particular promotion happening, so you can find cheaper tickets. And the third thing is that I am looking to book only one ticket in the near future, but if you were planning your trip kind of far ahead, then you might want to really try and secure those tickets far in advance, because they might actually be even cheaper than what we're talking about today. The shows that I've analyzed are 10 shows that are currently on both the West End and Broadway, and the way that we're going to do this is we're going to rank them according to their prices on the West End, because the West End is cheaper, and then I'm going to also share a comparative price on Broadway. Let's dive in. So let's start with the cheapest show on the West End, and you might be surprised, but the cheapest ticket that you can get on the West End at the moment out of these 10 shows that are available in both cities is Hadestown. I personally was surprised because Hadestown only opened in London recently, and this is a hot ticket in town, and when I went to see it, it was actually fully sold out. But the tickets that I'm talking about are £20 tickets that are available, and they're on the very edges of like balcony, and so these are restricted view tickets, but they are £20 and they will get you in the theater. So if you still want to experience Hadestown but you are on a budget, then £20 might be a good idea to spend on a ticket. If we compare this to New York City and Broadway, where this show has been performing for a while, the cheapest ticket you can get on Broadway for this show is actually $79. Similarly, Back to the Future is another show that you can get in London for £20 compared to $84 on Broadway. So these cheapest tickets are really cheap on the West End, and £20 for a ticket is honestly probably cheaper than a meal and a drink in London, and we're talking soft drink. It's really good to see that these tickets aren't just scarce and it was a one-off. There are actually quite a few dates that are available for £20 tickets on the West End. So make sure to check out Hadestown and Back to the Future if that is your budget. We are still in under 30 bracket, and there are two shows on the West End that you can see for £23 and £25 respectively, and that is The Book of Mormon and Wicked. Both amazing shows that have been for a while on the West End. You can check the reviews everywhere, and I've also done for the Book of Mormon here if you're interested to check out my review. These are the shows that guarantee you the best time if you're going with friends for the Book of Mormon, or family for Wicked, or also friends for Wicked, because it is a story about friendship. I think £23 and £25 is still pretty cheap and a pretty good deal, and again, these tickets are available throughout the run on the West End. Comparing this to Broadway prices, actually the Book of Mormon is the cheapest ticket on Broadway that I could find for shows that are in both cities, and that is $55, whereas Wicked is actually double the price for the cheapest ticket, and it is $110. We're entering that £30 to £40 bracket on the West End, and there are a few shows that fit within it, and Harry Potter and the Cursed Child is actually where you can get both parts to see on the West End for £30, which means that each show is £15. So technically this could be crowned as the cheapest, but I don't think that anyone wants to go and see Harry Potter without seeing both parts. So let's go with this being the 5th cheapest ticket in London for £30. If you're looking to see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child on Broadway, you will need to pay about double. It is $67. But an interesting thing to note about Harry Potter and the Cursed Child on Broadway is that it is not split across 2 parts. It is only 1 part, which means that if you don't want to take a day off or spend your weekend in Harry Potter world, then you can just go on Broadway and see it in one evening. But if I need to share my suggestion and recommendation, I would say that it is worth doing it the way that it is on the West End, which is 2 parts split across one day, where you get to see matinee performance part 1 and then evening performance part 2, because I think that is where all the magic comes to life. Conveniently, Six the Musical is the 6th cheapest West End ticket that I could find out of these 10 shows. You can get tickets on the West End for £34 compared to $80 on Broadway. So this is a pretty big difference. Again, it's over double the amount on the West End, and this show is pretty snappy and short. There's no interval. It is perfect for those of you who like pop culture and who are not really into sitting for 3 hours in the theater and you just want some like really fun, energizing, interesting thing to watch. Then Six is a perfect musical wherever you are, both in London or New York. The 7th cheapest, or actually now we're getting into the territory when we're talking about the most expensive shows on the West End when it comes to the cheapest tickets, is The Lion King. And you can get tickets for The Lion King for £35 for the cheapest. And I was actually really surprised to see that in New York on Broadway, this is actually the most expensive, cheapest ticket that I could find. Basically, it is $140 to see The Lion King, the same production that you can see in London, on Broadway. And I do remember when I went to see The Lion King, this was my first Broadway show that I ever have seen. I remember paying also about $150 because it was around Christmas time for worst seats in the house. So I do think that Lion King really maintains that reputation of one of the most expensive shows on Broadway. But if you happen to visit London, £35 for the same show is a pretty good deal for this well-established classic. We've got to the position number 8, which means that we have 3 shows left to go, and these are the 3 most expensive shows on both the West End and on Broadway. So number 8 on my cheapest list and number 3 on the most expensive is Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge premiered in 2021 on Broadway, and it was one of those shows that when you would see the pictures, you'd be like, oh my god, this is so good. And I remember when it came to London, it was again one of those shows that it was just so expensive to afford. But these days on the West End, the tickets can be found for £39, which is pretty affordable. I remember when I went to see it, I definitely paid about £80 for my ticket. So it's definitely getting better and it is more affordable to see it. However, when it comes to the most expensive ticket on the West End for this show, you will need to splash out around £300. So this is one of those shows that really has a wide range from that $39 to £300. Similarly, on Broadway, this show has a really wide range of ticket prices, starting at $79 all the way to $300 if we're talking about the weekdays. We're getting to the second most expensive ticket on the West End, and that is just £1 more than Moulin Rouge, and it is Hamilton. You can get the tickets for Hamilton for as low as £40, but if you want to go for the most expensive ticket on the West End, then you will need to pay £200. If we're talking about Broadway, then you will need to pay $132 for the cheapest ticket. This means that roughly for the cheapest ticket that you buy on Broadway, you can get at least 2 tickets on the West End. And without a doubt, I'm sure that you know by now which show is the number 1 of the most expensive. It is the most expensive in London, and it is the most expensive in New York as well, and that is Cabaret. I think that Cabaret is one of the best productions that I've ever seen, so I would say that it is justified that the cheapest ticket for this show is higher than for the other shows, because it is just such a revolutionary production that has redefined just the way that you experience theater, because you need to come an hour and a half earlier. Just the vibe of the show is completely different, and it kind of lures you in from the moment that they put the sticker on your phone and no one else can see what happens in the Kit Kat Club, and you're really immersed in the story from the moment you just come through the door, and I have never been in a production that does that. Also, the way that they renovated the theater, the way that they just make the whole production live and breathe, the vibe of the show is absolutely amazing. But regardless of that, in London you can get tickets for as low as £70 on the day that I checked, but I've also seen on some other days you can get them for £50 to £60. And I remember when I went to see it, I paid up to £70 to get the ticket, and it was the worst seats. But if you really want to splash some cash for a cabaret, well, be my guest. It is £300 for the most expensive seats on the West End. I'm so excited for Broadway audiences to be able to finally see this show, and especially because Eddie Redmayne is reprising his role, so this is going to be amazing. So if you want to see Cabaret right now, which is on Broadway at the moment, then you will need to pay around $140 for the cheapest ticket in the house. However, if you feel really adventurous and you want to pay for the most expensive ticket, then you will need to splash out $500. I don't know how adventurous you are. I would say that Cabaret is definitely worth seeing and paying a little bit more for compared to some other shows, but is it really worth $500? You tell me. I totally agree that theater tickets are expensive, and that especially if you're going to see a show on Broadway, you do really need to set aside a significant amount of money. And I know that from my personal experience that I went to see only 2 shows and I needed to pay around £200 for the tickets, and £200 I probably spent in London for about 5 shows. I hope that this is a good indication of how cheaper tickets on the West End are, and I would say if you are coming to London, then probably is good to check out these classics that are on Broadway as well, because that's the same production, it's just the cost is different, but the quality of the show will be absolutely the same. It doesn't mean that because it's cheaper in London that is less good. And if I'm ever visiting New York, I would always recommend to see the shows that you can't see in London, because in some ways it's a little bit silly to spend so much money for a production, for the exact same production that you can see in London, especially if you live in London. So actually seeing some other shows that are not on the West End and might not ever be transferred from Broadway to West End, I think that is where the sweet spot is, and that's what I did. I went to see Chicago, I went to see Sweeney Todd, which are 2 shows that aren't on the West End at the moment. But when it comes to Wicked and Hamilton, as much as I love them, I feel that spending a lot of money for tickets to see them on Broadway, I would love to do that, but at the same time I feel like that I would always prioritize some other shows. So I hope that this video has really shed some light into the differences in terms of the tickets. These are not the only differences when it comes to the theater experience, at least in my opinion, and I've done this whole video where I talked about the main differences between Broadway and the West End. And if you want to check it out, let me know what you think the biggest differences are in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe.